Welcome to the One in the Many. My name is Arshak Benlian. My purpose with the One in the Many podcast is to explore the process of integration as developmentally formative and therapeutically corrective factor in human psychology. The One in the Many is the study of how conscious life differentiates identity, integrates relation, regulates itself under constraint, and sustains direction through time. Subscribe to the One in the Many podcast and connect with me by writing to abenlian@oneinthemany.net. Among the many emotions that accompany human life, anxiety occupies a unique position. Unlike fear, which is typically directed toward an identifiable threat, anxiety often appears without a clearly defined object. It is felt as anticipation, apprehension, unease, or tension directed toward an uncertain future. Because of this apparent ambiguity, anxiety has often been treated as a pathological phenomenon, a malfunction of the mind, or an unavoidable burden of consciousness. From the perspective of the One in the Many, anxiety can be understood more precisely. It is neither a defect nor an arbitrary emotional disturbance. It is an experiential signal arising from the relationship between the demands of integration and the individual's perceived capacity to meet these demands. To understand anxiety, one must begin with the nature of human existence. Man is a volitionally conscious being whose survival depends upon identifying reality, organizing knowledge, and acting successfully within changing contexts. Every moment of life requires the continuous transformation of observation into understanding, understanding into action, and action into consequence. This movement constitutes the process of integration. Human flourishing depends not merely upon possessing knowledge, but upon successfully performing integrations across increasingly complex domains of existence. At the perceptual level, anxiety is encountered before it is named. It appears as muscular tension, heightened vigilance, accelerated thought, restlessness, anticipation, or a diffuse sense that something important remains unresolved. The individual does not first encounter the concept of anxiety. He encounters a modification of his relationship to reality. Attention becomes oriented toward possibility not yet actualized. The future presses upon the present. The organism begins allocating energy toward the anticipation of uncertainty. Only later does consciousness integrate these recurring experiences into the conceptual category called anxiety. This distinction is important because anxiety is often mistaken for the uncertainty itself. Yet uncertainty exists everywhere. The future is never fully known. Every act of learning, exploration, invention, or creation contains uncertainty. If uncertainty alone caused anxiety, all human activity would be perpetually debilitating. Clearly, this is not the case. What differentiates anxiety-producing uncertainty from growth-producing uncertainty is the individual's perceived capacity for integration. A child learning to walk encounters uncertainty. A scientist formulating a new theory encounters uncertainty. An entrepreneur investing his savings encounters uncertainty. A parent raising a child encounters uncertainty. Yet these situations differ dramatically in the degree of anxiety they evoke. The determining factor is not merely the magnitude of the unknown, but the confidence generated by prior successful integrations. From the one in the many perspective, anxiety can therefore be understood as the emotional experience arising from the perceived distance between current integration and required integration. When the demands of a context exceed the individual's demonstrated confidence in his ability to organize and respond effectively, anxiety emerges. The greater the perceived gap, the greater the anxiety. Anxiety is therefore not fundamentally a response to danger, it is a response to insufficiently integrated capability relative to anticipated demand. This perspective clarifies why misintegration amplifies anxiety. Misintegration occurs whenever observations, values, actions, or conclusions fail to achieve coherent organization. The individual may possess fragmented knowledge, contradictory beliefs, unclear priorities, incomplete skills, or inconsistent habits of action. Each incomplete cycle leaves residual uncertainty. Each failure to complete the movement from perception to validated action weakens confidence in future performance. The result is cumulative. Anxiety becomes less about the present challenge and more about a history of unresolved integrations. The individual begins to anticipate future difficulty because previous attempts at integration have not yet yielded stable confidence. In contrast, successful integration generates what might be called integration density. Every completed cycle contributes evidence that reality can be understood, challenges can be met, and uncertainty can be transformed into knowledge. Observation becomes identification. Identification becomes understanding. Understanding becomes action. And action becomes validation. Validation becomes confidence. Over time, thousands of successful integrations accumulate into a stable expectation of competence. The future remains uncertain, but the individual no longer doubts his capacity to engage it. This explains why mature expertise often appears calm. The expert is not characterized by the absence of uncertainty. In many cases, the expert perceives more complexity than the novice. What differs is the density of successful integrations available to organize that complexity. Experience has demonstrated repeatedly that uncertainty can be metabolized through attention, understanding, and action. Anxiety, therefore, diminishes not because the world becomes simpler, but because the individual becomes more capable. The relational domain introduces an additional layer to this dynamic. Human beings do not live in isolation. Much of life depends upon cooperation, trust, communication, and shared action. Here, anxiety acquires a distinctly interpersonal character because outcomes depend not only upon one's own integrations, but upon integrations of others. A relationship is a shared field of integration. When two individuals work together, each becomes partially dependent upon the volitional direction of the other. This introduces a unique form of uncertainty. Physical objects can often be predicted according to stable causal laws. Human beings cannot be predicted with the same certainty because they possess the capacity for self-directed choice. Relational anxiety, therefore, emerges when uncertainty exists regarding another person's future integrations. Will they remain honest? Will they fulfill their commitments? Will they remain aligned with shared values? Will their actions remain coherent with their stated intentions? These questions concern not physical causation, but volitional causation. Trust emerges as the mechanism by which this uncertainty is managed. Trust is not blind faith. It is an inductive estimate derived from observing a temporal consistency, contextual coherence, and causal productivity in another person's actions. Every successful cooperative integration strengthens trust. Every betrayal, contradiction, or unexplained inconsistency weakens it. The deepest significance of betrayal becomes apparent through this lens. Betrayal is painful not merely because something valuable has been lost. It is painful because an integrated model of another person's causation has collapsed. The mind must reorganize its understanding of the relationship. Anxiety rises because previously established expectations can no longer reliably guide future action. Yet, even here, anxiety serves a functional role. It signals that the relational model requires refinement. It indicates that additional observation, evaluation, and integration are necessary before confidence can be restored. Viewed developmentally, anxiety is therefore neither an enemy nor a pathology. It is information. It is the experiential marker of a discrepancy between current integration and anticipated demand. It reveals where growth is required, where competence remains incomplete, and where further integration must occur. The mature individual does not seek the elimination of anxiety. He seeks the development of sufficient integration to engage uncertainty productively. He understands that uncertainty is not the opposite of order, but the frontier of order. Every achievement, discovery, relationship, skill, and accomplishment begins as an uncertainty awaiting integration. From the perspective of the one in the many, anxiety is the emotional shadow cast by unrealized integration. As integration increases, the shadow recedes. Not because uncertainty disappears, but because the individual acquires increasing confidence in his ability to transform uncertainty into understanding, understanding into action, and action into flourishing. In this sense, anxiety reveals one of the deepest truths of human existence. The future can never be guaranteed, but the capacity for integration can always be developed. The growth of that capacity is the growth of freedom. The emergence of large-scale institutions introduced a remarkable achievement in human history. Through the division of labor, individuals could specialize their efforts, exchange the products of their competence, and collectively create levels of prosperity unimaginable to earlier generations. The farmer no longer needed to be a blacksmith. The blacksmith no longer needed to be a physician. The physician no longer needed to be an architect. Civilization advanced because differentiation increased the efficiency of integration. Yet every gain carries a corresponding challenge. As specialization expanded, the individual's direct perception of the larger process became increasingly obscured. The hunter understood his relationship to survival. The craftsman understood his relationship to his product. The merchant understood his relationship to exchange. Their actions and consequences remained perceptually connected. The modern individual, however, often participates in systems so vast and abstract that the relationship between his effort and the larger process becomes difficult to perceive. This development produced a subtle psychological inversion. Historically, systems emerged from the integrations of individuals. Increasingly, individuals came to experience themselves as dependent upon systems. What was once perceived as an extension of human agency gradually appeared as an authority unto itself. The institution became the source of order. The organization became the source of direction. The bureaucracy became the source of validation. The individual increasingly related to these structures not as their creator and participant, but as their subordinate. The consequence of this inversion is not merely political or economic, it's psychological. The confidence that emerges through integration requires direct participation in causation. A child develops confidence by learning to walk. An apprentice develops confidence by mastering a craft. A scientist develops confidence by discovering a principle. In each instance, the individual observes a relationship between effort and consequence. Through repeated cycles of successful integration, he develops trust in his capacity to transform uncertainty into understanding and understanding into action. When the majority of integrations become embedded within systems too large to comprehend, the individual may retain the benefits of those integrations while losing direct contact with the experience that produced them. He enjoys the security generated by countless integrations performed by others, but possesses little experiential evidence of his own ability to reproduce them. He becomes surrounded by evidence of civilization's competence while increasingly uncertain of his own. The result is a growing discrepancy between collective integration and individual integration. This discrepancy creates fertile conditions for anxiety. The individual becomes dependent upon mechanisms whose operation he does not understand and whose direction he cannot directly influence. Financial markets fluctuate, educational standards change, technological systems evolve, political institutions expand and contract. Economic conditions transform unexpectedly. The causal structures governing daily life appear increasingly distant and opaque. The individual senses that his well-being depends upon forces beyond his immediate comprehension. Anxiety emerges naturally within such conditions because the perception of causation has been displaced. The problem is not merely uncertainty. Human beings have always lived with uncertainty. The problem is the diminishing experience of personal agency in relation to uncertainty. The response to this condition often takes the form of psychological substitution. Rather than developing confidence through demonstrated competence, individuals seek reassurance through affiliation. Rather than acquiring certainty through understanding, they acquire belonging through identification. Institutions, ideologies, credentials, social movements, and collective identities become surrogate sources of stability. These structures may temporarily reduce anxiety because they offer an appearance of certainty, but they cannot fully replace the confidence generated by direct integration. This dynamic helps explain why unprecedented prosperity has not eliminated anxiety. Material abundance reduces many physical threats, but does not automatically cultivate integrative competence. One may inherit comfort without inheriting confidence. One may possess access to extraordinary systems without possessing the ability to navigate their complexity independently. In such circumstances, anxiety persists because the fundamental requirement of psychological development remains unmet. From the perspective of the one in the many, the remedy is neither regression nor rebellion against civilization. The solution is not the abandonment of specialization, institutions, or technological advancement. Such a response would misunderstand the source of the problem. The challenge is not differentiation itself, but differentiation without sufficient personal integration. The task of the modern individual is therefore unique. He must consciously reclaim participation in the process of integration. He must understand the principles governing the systems upon which he depends. He must cultivate skills that connect perception to action. He must restore the relationship between effort and consequence. He must become capable of identifying not only what functions he performs, but why those functions matter within the larger order of value creation. In this sense, the future of psychological development may depend upon a renewed appreciation for the role of integration. Anxiety is not conquered through dependence upon increasingly sophisticated systems. It is transformed through the development of increasingly sophisticated integrations. The individual who understands his role in the larger process ceases to experience himself as a passive recipient of civilization and begins to experience himself as one of its active participants. The deepest antidote to anxiety may therefore be neither comfort nor certainty, but participation. For it is through participation in the ongoing work of integration that the individual rediscovers the source of competence, confidence, purpose, and ultimately, freedom. This is the one in the many. The principle of life is the process of integration from a single cell to an ideal human being. The story of life unfolds through integration, from a single percept to a library of knowledge. Through virtue, reason, honesty, independence, selfishness, productivity, you set your values, purpose, to achieve self-esteem and happiness. Through time and energy, from induction to integration to reduction, the smallest particle unifies matter, and the highest purpose unifies your life. You, the one in the many, matter. May you integrate your life with value-driven days.